"We don't need help from the old," Dylan said, pushing my hand away from the grocery bags I'd carried up their steps. I only smiled and set them down anyway. Pride was a heavy thing, and I'd learned not to wrestle it. "Tell me where you're from if you've ever stayed quiet for love. Subscribe to Her Voices, your voice matters. My name is Evelyn Mercer. I'm 62 and live in Greenville, North Carolina, in the same brick house my husband and I bought when we were newly married. Harold passed away 8 years ago, and though the walls sometimes echo, they also hold every sound that built my life. I was a bookkeeper for 35 years, quiet work that suited me. Numbers make sense when people do not. I retired with enough to stay comfortable, not rich, but safe. Most days, I tend to my garden, read the newspaper at the kitchen table, and keep the coffee pot full for whoever stops by. My daughter, Claire, is my only child. She was born on a rainy April morning when Harold rushed through red lights to reach the hospital. She grew into a bright, determined woman who loved to organize everything. Even her toys were sorted by color. I raised her to believe in steady work and kindness, 2 things that built our home. When she graduated college and found a job in Raleigh, I told her the same line my mother once told me: "Keep your head, keep your word, and keep your receipts." She laughed, but she did. Then came Dylan Whitmore. He was charming, confident, and fast-talking, the kind of man who believed every problem could be solved by an app. Claire met him at a business seminar, and within a year they were married. I paid for the catering as my gift. Watching her walk down the aisle, I felt that peculiar ache mothers know, pride stitched with fear. I wanted to believe Dylan's energy meant ambition, not restlessness. They moved into a new apartment near the city. I helped them paint it, pale yellow walls that caught the afternoon sun. For a while, everything seemed good. Claire called every few days, describing dinners she and Dylan cooked together. He liked spicy food. She didn't, but she tried. When I visited, they'd show me budget spreadsheets Dylan made on his laptop. I smiled at the effort, though the numbers looked more like dreams than plans. I learned early not to give advice unless it was asked for. Still, I kept quiet reminders tucked in conversation. "A savings account gives peace of mind," I'd say over coffee. Dylan would nod, quick to agree, but quicker to change the topic. He liked talking about startups, not safety nets. Claire balanced him out with patience, yet I could see how much she wanted to please him. Once, during dinner, he joked that I still used paper ledgers like a museum piece. I laughed, telling him paper never lost its password. He grinned, thinking he'd won the joke, and Claire looked between us nervously. I made sure she saw only calm. You can teach children many things, but the lesson they remember most is how you handle pride, yours and theirs. When Harold died, I learned what it meant to rebuild quietly. Bills still came, the roof still leaked, and no one offered applause when I managed it all. But I managed. I wanted Claire to know that strength too, the kind that doesn't announce itself. So when she called months after the wedding, her voice softer than usual, I felt a ripple of worry. "Everything's fine, Mom," she said. "Dylan's just busy with work." I let it pass, but something in her tone didn't match her words. Mothers hear what's between sentences. I reminded myself not to interfere. They were adults. Still, I found myself keeping the phone nearby in case she called again. People say love means letting go, but that's only half the truth. The other half is being ready when someone falls and pretending you didn't see them trip. I wasn't planning to save Claire. I only wanted to stand where she could find me if the ground gave way. If you've ever watched someone you love walk into the same mistake you once made, tell me in the comments, and subscribe to Her Voices. This community listens. It was 6 months after their wedding when the first real crack appeared. Claire called one evening while I was folding laundry. Her voice trembled, light at first, like she was trying to keep it casual. "Mom, Dylan's job ended today. They said the startup lost funding." She paused, waiting for my reaction. I took a slow breath and asked what she needed. "We'll be okay," she said too quickly. "He's got ideas. He always has ideas." I told her ideas were fine, but the rent company didn't take those as payment. She laughed weakly and promised they'd figure it out. 2 weeks later, I drove to the city for a visit. Their apartment looked less cheerful than I remembered. The walls still shone yellow, but unopened mail lay in a pile by the door. Claire moved slower, her hair tied up carelessly. Dylan greeted me with polite charm, though his eyes darted toward the stack of envelopes. "Just temporary chaos," he said. "I've got something lined up." I nodded, offering to make dinner. He hesitated but agreed. While I cooked, he paced the living room, phone in hand, muttering about investors and deadlines that didn't exist. After dinner, I placed a folded check on the counter. "For groceries," I said. He looked at it, then at me. We don't need help from the old, he said, echoing words that would stay carved in my memory. The air went still. Claire looked down at her plate, and I felt my pulse steady instead of rise. I smiled faintly, took the check back, and slipped it into my purse. Then you'll be fine, I said. That night, driving home, I replayed the scene. Not with anger, with study. Dylan's pride wasn't cruelty. It was fear wearing confidence. Still, fear can ruin a marriage faster than cruelty can. I marked the date in my calendar. March 18th. It was the day I decided to stop offering and start observing. The following week, Claire called again. Mom, do you think it's wrong to use savings while he's looking for work? She asked quietly. I told her savings are meant for storms, not decorations. Then I guess it's raining, she whispered. She didn't say how much they had, but I knew it wasn't enough to last long. By early April, I noticed little signs of strain when I visited the refrigerator half empty, the Wi-Fi disconnected, a rent notice peeking from the counter. Claire's wedding ring was missing one afternoon. She said she'd taken it in to be resized. I didn't believe her, but I nodded. Dylan spoke less and avoided eye contact. He was polite, always polite, the way people are when they feel watched. On a Saturday, I found Claire sitting in her car outside my house. She looked pale and tired, her hands gripping the steering wheel. I just needed to breathe, she said when I opened the door. I made her tea, and she told me Dylan had been offered a partnership in a new venture, a friend's software idea that promised quick returns. He needed capital, and she'd helped. It's not much, she said, just something from my account. I didn't press, but the unease settled in me like cold air through an open window. That night, I went through my old file box where Harold and I kept every receipt, tax return, and note from our years together. It reminded me how order brings peace. I couldn't fix Claire's choices, but I could prepare for their consequences. I made a new folder labeled Whitmore Household, though I told no one. Days turned into weeks. Each phone call from Claire felt shorter, her laughter more forced. When I asked how Dylan's venture was going, she said, he's optimistic. I'd heard that tone before. It's the voice people use when they're trying to convince themselves. One Sunday, I dropped by with a casserole, pretending it was for the freezer. Dylan opened the door. The apartment smelled of takeout containers and stress. He thanked me but didn't invite me in. I could see Claire in the background, her expression caught between pride and relief. I smiled, handed him the dish, and left before the silence could deepen. In my car, I told myself something simple. Love that rescues too soon becomes dependence, but love that waits too long becomes regret. I didn't yet know which side of that balance I was on. If you've ever had to choose between stepping in or standing back, share what guided you, and subscribe to Her Voices to keep these stories alive. Your voice matters. 3 weeks passed before I heard from Claire again. When she finally called, her tone was bright but thin, like fabric stretched too far. Everything's fine now, Mom, she said. Dylan's project is moving forward. We just have to be patient. I wanted to believe her, but the truth rarely begins with reassurance. I told her I was proud of her faith, then asked if she needed anything. No, we're good, she said quickly. The call ended, leaving more silence than comfort. 2 mornings later, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was addressed to Whitmore Household, but my address was printed below. The postal clerk must have remembered that Claire once lived here. I turned it over, noticing the logo of a local credit union. I stood by the window as I opened it. Inside was a monthly bank statement showing withdrawals of $18,400 over 6 weeks. The account name read Claire L. Whitmore, joint with Dylan R. Whitmore. My hands trembled slightly. I wasn't angry, just afraid for her. I knew enough about bookkeeping to see the pattern. Large withdrawals every Friday, each ending in round numbers. People in control don't make withdrawals in round numbers. I placed the statement in a folder beside the one I'd made for them weeks earlier. My instincts told me not to confront them yet. When pride meets proof too soon, it explodes. The next day, I drove to the credit union, pretending I needed to update my own information. I'd been a member there for decades. The tellers knew me by name. When the woman at the counter asked how I'd been, I said fine, then leaned forward just enough to lower my voice. I received a statement meant for my daughter by mistake, I said. I just want to be sure her address is corrected. She checked her screen, nodded, and said, looks like her mail still lists this address as secondary. I thanked her, then asked, is there any note of fraud or hold on the account? She shook her head. No issues. Her voice was kind, but I could tell she sensed more behind my question. I smiled politely and left. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and watched the rain tap against the windshield. The numbers on that paper weren't just financial, they were emotional coordinates of trust being drained. I couldn't stop thinking about the look on Claire's face when she said she believed in Dylan's project. Belief is beautiful, but it can be expensive. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "Can I call you tomorrow? I just need to talk." She didn't call the next day. 2 nights later, she sent another message, a short voice memo instead of words. I pressed play. Her voice was shaky. "Mom, I think I made a mistake. Dylan says it's temporary, but I can't sleep. We gave his friend our savings, all of it. I just needed someone to know." The recording ended with a small sob. I replayed that memo several times, memorizing every pause. It became my second truth prop, proof of what love and fear sound like when they collide. I stored it on a flash drive and labeled it CW Confession. The old bookkeeper in me was preparing for whatever came next, not out of suspicion, but out of protection. 2 days later, I visited their apartment under the excuse of dropping off homemade soup. Dylan opened the door again, polite as ever. "Claire's resting," he said. His eyes looked heavier, as if the charm had grown tired. I offered him the soup and noticed the living room now missing the framed photo from their wedding. The bare wall said more than he did. When I got home, I called my old colleague, Marcus Denton, a financial advisor who'd helped Harold and me manage our retirement years ago. "Marcus," I said, "I might need some quiet advice." He listened as I explained the situation without naming names. "If you have proof of withdrawals," he said, "keep it safe. Don't confront yet. People cornered by pride don't reason, they react." His voice was steady, full of experience. "Let them feel the lesson while you guard the exit." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the folder open before me, bank statement, voice memo, and my handwritten notes. I wasn't planning revenge. I was building understanding. The hardest part of loving adults is learning to protect them without them noticing. The next morning, I wrote Claire a short email. "You don't have to tell me everything, sweetheart. Just promise you're keeping copies of whatever you sign." She replied an hour later with a heart emoji. No words. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer. If you've ever held evidence that broke your heart but saved someone else's, tell me in the comments. And subscribe to Her Voices. This community honors quiet strength. Marcus Denton arrived at my house the next afternoon, carrying the same leather briefcase he'd had 20 years ago. He looked older but no less precise, the kind of man who still polished his shoes before church. We sat at my kitchen table, the folder between us. "You always did keep better records than anyone," he said with a small smile. I poured coffee and told him everything, not the emotions, just the facts. Dylan's lost job, the withdrawals, Claire's voice, memo. He listened without interruption, tapping his pen against a yellow legal pad as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned back, thinking. "You can't intervene yet," he said. "If she's legally joint on the account, it's her money too. But you can prepare her safety net." He outlined steps in his neat handwriting. Separate credit lines, review joint liabilities, and request copies of investment documents if possible. He called it a protection protocol. I called it hope with paperwork. Marcus suggested I draft a letter, not a scolding one, but something gentle that offered help without wounding pride. Together, we wrote, "Claire, I've been reviewing retirement plans and realized how much I learned late in life about financial safety. If you ever want to discuss budgets or small protections, I'd love to share what worked for me." It sounded harmless, even friendly. He said, "Send it from your personal email. Keep tone neutral. Dylan won't see a trap." I asked Marcus what to do with the evidence I already had. He told me to make duplicates and keep them in a separate location. "Truth has to be stored where emotion can't reach it," he said. That line stayed with me. I placed one copy in my desk drawer and another in a small fireproof box under my bed. We talked about Claire's likely fear, how she might cling tighter to Dylan out of guilt. Marcus reminded me that shame often binds people stronger than love does. "If you confront her now," he said, "she'll defend him, not herself." I knew he was right. My job was not to prove I was right, it was to keep her future intact. After he left, I reread the letter before sending it. Every word felt like a test of restraint. Within an hour, Claire replied, "That's sweet, Mom. Maybe soon. Things are crazy right now." I knew soon meant not yet. Still, I felt relief. The door between us wasn't closed, it was just guarded. The next week, Marcus called with another idea. "There's a community financial workshop this month," he said. "If Claire won't take your help directly, invite her there. It's public, neutral, and safe." I told him I'd try. When I asked what I owed him, he laughed. "Consider it repayment for the cookies you brought to the office every tax season." I went to that workshop alone the first time, just to see. The speaker talked about digital fraud, startup investments, and emotional spending topics that fit Claire's situation too well. I picked up pamphlets and tucked them into my purse. On the drive home, I imagined sitting beside her there, nodding together at each warning sign. Maybe someday we would. Later that week, Claire called unexpectedly. "Mom, can we come by Sunday?" she asked. "Dylan wants to apologize for being short with you." I agreed, though my stomach tightened. Marcus had warned that sudden politeness can mean desperation. Still, I prepared a calm table, roast chicken, and my usual lemon pie. If there was going to be truth, I wanted it served with grace. That night, I checked the flash drive again, listening to Claire's voice in that brief recording. It reminded me why I was doing this, not to interfere to preserve her dignity before she lost it completely. If you've ever stood quietly behind someone who didn't know you were their safety net, share that moment in the comments, and subscribe to Her Voices, where every lesson becomes strength. Sunday came warm and bright, a deceptive kind of day that made everything look easier than it was. I set the table early, polished the old silverware Harold had bought from an estate sale, and took a steadying breath. Claire and Dylan arrived right on time, holding a small bouquet from the grocery store. Dylan smiled too wide, the way people do when they're covering something heavy. "Smells amazing," he said, slipping into charm as naturally as air. I thanked him and pretended not to notice how thin his wedding band had become, loose from weight he'd probably lost. Over lunch, conversation stayed safe. Weather, traffic, a neighbor's barking dog. Claire laughed in short bursts, glancing at him before answering me. When she reached for water, her hand trembled slightly. Dylan complimented the pie, then said, "You were right about keeping receipts, Mrs. Mercer. I should have listened earlier." I smiled and asked what brought that thought on. "Just a rough month," he admitted. "Investors pulled out of the project, but we'll bounce back." He said it too fast. Claire looked down, pushing pie crumbs around her plate. I didn't press further. After they left, I gathered the dishes and wrote the date on a note card. Dinner, April 27th, charm returning, desperation underneath. It became the first line of what I would later call my patience log. For 12 weeks, I documented each encounter with them like case notes. Not out of judgment, but to track how truth reveals itself in patterns. Week 1, Claire called asking if I knew how to freeze credit cards temporarily. Week 2, Dylan borrowed my ladder, saying he was fixing a leak, though their apartment didn't have a yard. Week 3, I noticed their car gone from the driveway. She said they sold it to simplify expenses. By week 4, creditors began calling my house, asking for Mrs. Whitmore. I told them politely they had the wrong number, but each call felt like a knock from reality. I started leaving groceries on their doorstep early in the morning, before Dylan left for his meetings. Claire texted thank yous filled with heart emojis, never words. I counted those quiet deliveries, 12 visits in 12 weeks, each one a reminder that love can exist without applause. By June, their power was cut off for 2 days. Claire finally confessed they were 3 months behind on rent. Dylan had taken a part-time job with a delivery company, but refused to let her tell me. "He's embarrassed," she said. I told her embarrassment feeds faster when it's hidden. She only nodded. One afternoon, I stopped by unannounced. Claire answered in tears, saying Dylan had gone to meet someone about another investment rescue. Her face looked pale, her eyes tired. I noticed their wedding photo had been replaced by an empty frame. I didn't ask where it was. Instead, I handed her an envelope with some cash. "Just groceries," I said. She started to refuse, but I added softly, "From mother to daughter, not investor to debtor." She took it then, silently. That evening, I called Marcus again. "It's unraveling," I told him. He sighed. "It has to. People rarely learn with full plates. They learn when hunger sharpens reason." I hated that he was right. By week 10, Dylan stopped answering my calls. Claire's messages grew shorter. She mentioned a possible eviction, then apologized for worrying me. I told her worry was a mother's rent, paid monthly, never late. The 12th week brought the breaking point. It was early July, the kind of humid heat that sticks to your breath. I went to their building to drop off a fan I wasn't using. As I approached the door, I heard their voices inside, low and tense. Dylan's tone was sharp. "We are not moving in with your mother, Claire. I can fix this." Her reply came small. "You've been fixing it for months." I froze, my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't knock. Instead, I turned back, my heart heavy but steady. They needed to reach bottom together. That night, I sat on my porch, the cicadas loud enough to fill the silence I'd kept too long. I reviewed my notes. 12 weeks, $18,4 gone, pride intact. I closed the folder, whispering to the air, enough learning the hard way. 2 days later, I received a call from Claire at dawn. Mom, she said through tears, we can't stay here anymore. I told her to come home. There was no judgment in my voice, only relief. She asked if Dylan could come too. Of course, I said, but he'll have to sit at the table. That morning, I baked bread and brewed extra coffee. There are lessons best taught with the smell of home and the evidence of patience. I didn't know how the confrontation would unfold, but I knew it was time. If you've ever had to love someone through their mistakes instead of away from them, share your strength in the comments and subscribe to Her Voices, where silence still speaks truth. They arrived just before noon, both looking smaller than I remembered. Claire's eyes were swollen from crying, and Dylan carried a single duffel bag as if it contained their entire marriage. I opened the door without a word and motioned them in. The house smelled of coffee and the bread I had baked that morning. I had set 3 cups on the table. They sat down quietly, like children waiting for grades they already knew they'd failed. For a while, I let the silence breathe. Dylan finally spoke first. Mrs. Mercer, I owe you an apology. I was out of line that day. His voice was rough, the arrogance stripped away. I nodded and said, Thank you, Dylan. I accepted it the moment you said it. He looked surprised, unsure whether forgiveness could come that easily. It didn't, but it started there. Claire reached for my hand. We made a mess, Mom. We thought we could fix it before you found out. I looked at her, then at him. You both are adults. Fixing your mistakes is part of that, but I need to understand what happened. Dylan hesitated, then opened a folder from his bag, crumpled receipts, unfinished contracts, and emails from someone named Trevor Lang, promising a 20% return on a mobile retail app. I recognized the pattern instantly: fast promises, slow truth. I took the papers and read them carefully. Did you sign any legal documents? I asked. Claire said quietly. Just one. I co-signed the transfer. Dylan rubbed his forehead. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Trevor disappeared. I placed the papers down and stood. Then we begin here. I walked to the cabinet, retrieved the folder I'd kept hidden, and placed it on the table beside his. Inside were the bank statements, my notes, and the voice memo file. I've known for weeks, I said. I wasn't spying. I was waiting until you were ready to tell the truth. Claire covered her mouth, tears welling up. Dylan stared at the evidence, color draining from his face. You went to the bank? He asked softly. No, I said. The bank came to me by mistake, and God, perhaps, by design. He swallowed hard. I didn't mean for her to suffer. I looked at him evenly. Intentions don't change consequences. Then I softened my voice. I didn't come to punish you. I came to understand how pride became your plan. For the first time, Dylan's shoulders sagged. I thought I could make her proud, he whispered. She believed in me, and I didn't want her to see me fail. Claire turned toward him, crying now. I never needed you to be perfect. I just needed you to be honest. I sat down again, steady and clear. You can rebuild money, Dylan. You can't rebuild trust without truth. I slid the bank statement toward him. $18,400. Every dollar has to be accounted for, even if all you can return is self-respect. He nodded slowly, his voice breaking. We'll pay it back, I promise. I shook my head. Not to me, to yourselves. You'll both meet with Marcus Denton this week. He'll guide you through budgeting and debt recovery. I've already spoken with him. Claire looked startled. You planned this? I prepared for this, I said. Mothers do. I reached across the table and touched her hand. I once let your father's pride ruin a year of our marriage. I forgave him, but it taught me that love, without accountability, turns into silence. I won't let yours turn that way. Dylan's eyes glistened. You're not angry? I smiled faintly. Anger doesn't teach, time does. The room went still again, but this time, it felt lighter. The confession had drained something poisonous from it. After a long pause, I said, You can stay here for now. But this is not a retreat, it's a beginning. You'll both contribute chores, small payments, honest words. No secrets in my house. Claire nodded, relief softening her face. Dylan whispered, Thank you, Mrs. Mercer. I don't deserve your kindness. I met his gaze and said, Then earn it. That evening, as they unpacked in the guest room, I stood in the hallway, listening to the faint sound of their voices, not arguing, just talking. It was the sound of rebuilding. I felt no triumph, only peace. Justice, I realized, isn't about punishment, it's about order restored. Later, I took the voice memo and bank copies, sealed them in a new envelope, and wrote on it, Proof kept for understanding, not for blame. I locked it away. Some lessons don't need witnesses, only remembrance. If you've ever chosen grace when anger would have been easier, tell me in the comments, and subscribe to Her Voices, where truth and dignity meet. The next morning began with sunlight spilling through the kitchen blinds and the quiet hum of a coffee pot. Claire joined me first, hair still damp from her shower, her face softer than I'd seen it in months. She sat down with a sigh that sounded like release. "He's still asleep," she said. "Did we ruin everything, Mom?" I stirred sugar into her cup and handed it over. "You bent it," I said gently. "Now you'll learn how to straighten it without breaking it again." Marcus came by that afternoon. Dylan looked nervous when I introduced them, but Marcus greeted him kindly. "I'm here to help you both, not to judge," he said. He laid out a structured plan. Open a new joint account with spending caps, report the loss to the bank for documentation, and set up small automatic savings. Dylan took notes carefully, the first sign of real humility. Marcus also helped Claire separate her credit, explaining how shared debt can outlive love if ignored. She listened closely, nodding with quiet determination. After Marcus left, Dylan lingered in the kitchen. "I didn't realize how much I'd been guessing," he said. "I thought confidence was the same as leadership," I replied. "Real leaders admit when they're lost. It's how they find the map." He smiled faintly, then said something that surprised me. "You remind me of my mother. She was tough but kind. I think I needed that again." For the first time, I saw not defiance in him, but the scared young man behind it. Over the next few weeks, small changes appeared like cautious sunlight after a storm. Dylan got a steady job at a logistics company, not glamorous, but stable. He left early, came home tired, and stopped making big promises. Claire started working part-time at a clinic and began attending evening classes in bookkeeping. "Maybe I inherited a little of you," she told me one night, smiling. I told her she'd inherited the best part: endurance. Every Sunday, we met at my table to review their progress. The first time, they managed to save $50. The next, $120. Dylan logged each number in a small spiral notebook. "It's not much," he said. "It's honest," I replied. And honest money, like honest love, grows slowly but lasts. By late August, they had enough to move into a smaller apartment across town. I helped them find one clean, modest, with sunlight in the kitchen. When the leasing agent asked for a co-signer, Dylan looked at me. I shook my head gently. "This one has to be yours." He hesitated, then nodded. "Fair enough." Watching him sign the papers himself, I felt the same. The pride I'd felt when Claire took her first steps. Before they moved out, Dylan handed me an envelope with $300 inside. "Our first repayment," he said. "You don't owe me," I told him. "We owe ourselves," he replied. I let him place it in the folder, now thinner and cleaner than before. Claire hugged me long and hard before leaving. "You never yelled," she whispered. "That made it worse in a good way." I laughed softly. "Shouting makes noise, patience makes memory." She smiled through tears and said, "I'll remember that." After they drove away, I stood on the porch with a quiet ache of relief. The air smelled like rain about to fall, the kind that cleans everything without flooding it. I thought of Harold then, how proud he would have been to see calm win over chaos. In the weeks that followed, they called often but rarely for help, sometimes just to share a new recipe or a photo of their tidy living room. One evening, Claire sent a picture of Dylan cooking dinner with a note. "He's learning the value of leftovers." I laughed until I cried. People often think lessons come from sermons or warnings. I've learned they come from waiting. Steady, quiet waiting. I didn't save my daughter from failure. I stood beside her until she found her footing. That difference saved us both. If you've ever learned that strength can sound like silence, tell me what it taught you. And subscribe to Her Voices, where love grows through understanding. 6 months later, the house felt full again, not of people, but of peace. Claire and Dylan invited me to Sunday lunch in their new apartment, a modest second-floor unit with sunlight touching every wall. The smell of roasted chicken drifted from the kitchen. Dylan was setting the table, careful and deliberate, as if each plate were a small act of apology. Claire hugged me so tightly I could feel her relief. "We're finally steady," she said, smiling. "It's not perfect, but it's ours." The meal was simple and warm. Dylan spoke less, but when he did, every word carried weight. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, lifting his glass, "I owe you more than I can repay. You didn't just help us, you waited for us to see the truth." I smiled. "Sometimes the old don't need to help," I said softly. "They just need to be seen." After lunch, we sat on their small balcony overlooking a row of oak trees. Claire showed me her notebook filled with monthly budgets, color-coded and neat. "I started tracking expenses like you taught me," she said. It makes me feel in control again. I touched her hand. That's what order does, it turns fear into peace. Dylan joined us with coffee and said, "We even have an emergency fund now. $200, but it's something." I told him that the first dollar saved is always the hardest one. The rest just follow its lead. As I left, Claire walked me to my car. The wind carried the scent of fresh rain and new beginnings. She said, "You were right to wait, Mom. If you'd rescued us sooner, we wouldn't have learned anything." I looked at her, proud beyond words. "You learned what every grown heart must," I said. "That help isn't weakness, and pride isn't strength." Driving home, I passed the credit union and smiled. The folder marked Whitmore Household was now tucked in my desk, closed for good. It held not just evidence, but evolution, the proof that patience can heal where force cannot. Sometimes justice is quiet, sometimes grace looks like waiting, and sometimes the hardest wisdom a mother can offer is to let love take the long road home. Thanks for listening. Share your story in the comments. When did you stay silent out of love? Subscribe to Her Voices for more stories like this one. Your voice matters.